Hi, I'm Jolene, and my parents told me to leave my house key and take my suitcase because the house belonged to the family now. They packed my things, changed the locks, and replaced every trace of me with their own. But what if I told you that wasn't the worst part? What if the real betrayal didn't start at the dinner table, but years earlier with small lies, subtle manipulation, and a plan so calculated it made me question every memory I thought was mine? Why would a family steal a home from their own daughter, then try to erase her like she never existed? The casserole had barely begun to cool when I stepped back from the stove, wiping my hands on a towel that still smelled like last summer's lavender. I'd been up since 6, scrubbing, folding, arranging, maybe overdoing it. But I wanted it to be right. My first real dinner as a homeowner. My first time hosting the people who'd never really believed I could stand on my own. The table was set with Grandma's old china, the faded blue rims giving it that perfect touch of nostalgia. I had name cards too. Not fancy, just printed and laminated at work. I placed Dad at the head, Mom to his right, and Isolde across from me, like we were at some soft-lit diplomatic summit and not a family fractured by passive aggression. I still believed, hoped, maybe, that they'd walk in and see what I'd done, what I'd built. That they'd smile, really smile, and say something like, "You've done well, Jolene." I imagined Dad finally looking at me without calculation in his eyes, and Mom not rearranging the salt shakers as if I'd gotten it all wrong. By 6:35, I heard tires on gravel and my stomach coiled. I adjusted the wine bottle for the 3rd time and smoothed the skirt I wasn't used to wearing. They knocked, and I opened the door with the kind of grin you practice, not because it's fake, but because you want so badly for this to go right. "Smells like food," Isolde said first, stepping in without a hello. She was in suede boots, expensive ones, tracking faint dust on the floor I'd mopped twice. Dad followed, giving a slight nod as his eyes skimmed the ceiling, the corners, the photos on the wall like he was appraising a rental. "This place," he said, "has good bones. Feels like it should belong to everyone, doesn't it?" I laughed, unsure if it was a compliment. "It's cozy, I think." Mom walked in last, silent, her fingers grazing the mantel, where I'd placed a framed picture of us from when I was 10, before things started feeling conditional. We sat down. The salad was untouched. Isolde scrolled her phone under the table, while Dad asked how I managed to afford hardwood floors. "You know," he said, "a house this size is a lot for one person." I smiled tight. "It's manageable." No one asked about my promotion. During the main course, I caught Mom glancing at the clock. "Everything's cooked," she said eventually. "Thanks," I replied. She didn't look at me. Dessert came and went. I brought out the cobbler, homemade crust, hand-cut apples. I waited for Dad to say something, anything. Instead, he stood. It wasn't just that he stood. It was the way he folded his napkin first, set it down with precision. His eyes locked onto mine, and something in his jaw shifted. I'd seen it when I was 15 and asked to apply out of state. I saw it when I bought the car without consulting him. "We've discussed it," he said. "This house should come back to the family." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Mom nodded, not looking at me. "You've done well, honey, but it's too much house, and we think it's time you refocus." Isolde leaned back, arms crossed. "It's not personal." "Your old room is still there," Dad continued, "but we'll be moving into this place. Ryan's already drawn up renovation plans." I stood so quickly, my chair scraped the floor. "You're... what?" "I don't want this to get emotional," Mom said, like I'd raised my voice. "It's a house, Jolene." Isolde stood too. I hadn't even noticed she'd left the room. She reappeared with a suitcase, my suitcase, the green one I used when I moved to college. "We packed your essentials," she said, "just so this can be smooth." I opened my mouth, but no words came. My voice had locked itself somewhere behind my ribs. "I'm the legal owner," I finally whispered. Dad's smile was thin. "We'll sort that." I didn't cry. That would have given them too much. Instead, I walked to the table, picked up my phone, wallet, and the keys I'd polished this morning. I laid the keys gently next to my untouched wine glass. No one said a word. Outside, the air bit colder than it should have. I put the suitcase in my trunk. I didn't look back. I drove without a destination, the suitcase thumping in the back with every turn like a heartbeat trying to remind me what was real. Streetlights blurred past, faceless houses glowing with a kind of comfort that now felt like mythology. When I finally stopped, it was at a gas station on the edge of town, the kind that still sold car fresheners and cheap coffee. I parked under the buzzing overhead light, my fingers trembling as I reached for my phone. It was buzzing. Unknown number. And something in me knew. This call wasn't from the past. It was from the part of my future they hadn't stolen yet. The call came just as I was about to open the car door. The phone buzzed against my thigh, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. My thumb hovered before I answered, my voice low, flat. "This is Jolene." "Ms. Shipman, this is Alexis from Midwestern Bank's mortgage department," said a voice too chipper for a Sunday morning. "I'm calling to confirm some recent changes requested on your account." My stomach tightened. "What kind of changes?" "There was a request to add co-owners to your mortgage and to update the primary contact details. We flagged it because it didn't come through the secure portal, and the information seemed inconsistent." I turned fully toward the windshield, one hand gripping the steering wheel, though the engine was off. "I didn't authorize any changes. I haven't shared access with anyone." A pause. "That's what we thought. You are still listed as the sole legal owner. No co-owners, no power of attorney, nothing shared. We've locked the account for now and logged the attempted change." I swallowed hard. "Do you have the names they used?" "Vernon and Marla Shipman." It wasn't the names that shocked me. It was how unsurprised I felt hearing them. "Thank you for calling," I said, voice steady now. "Please send me documentation." "Of course. And Ms. Shipman, I'm sorry." I ended the call and sat in the quiet. The gas station lights hummed above me, neon buzzing like a bug zapper. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But something shifted, quiet, like a pin falling in a cavern. I pulled out onto the road and drove. By the time I reached the familiar curve leading into my neighborhood, the sun had fully broken through the clouds, washing everything in a soft gold that felt like mockery. I slowed when I approached my driveway. My key didn't fit. I tried again. No give. I stepped back and looked up. Curtains had changed. A potted plant I hadn't bought now sat on the porch. Then the door opened. A woman I'd never seen stood there, maybe early 20s, wearing joggers and a hoodie that wasn't hers. "You Jolene?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "This is my house." She tilted her head, unimpressed. "I was told you wouldn't be coming back." I stared. "Told by who?" "Marla and Vernon. They said you had some instability, that you left voluntarily." My jaw clenched, but I didn't argue. I didn't want to give her the show she'd probably been briefed to expect. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of the hallway, my hallway. The rug was gone. The picture frames on the wall had changed. My home had been dressed in someone else's clothes. "I'm going to need you to leave now," she added. I stepped away from the door without a word. My heels clicked against the concrete as I walked to the car, each step trying not to tremble. As I buckled my seatbelt, a neighbor strolled by with her dog. "Morning, Jolene," she said, like nothing was out of place, like she hadn't just seen me shut out of my own life. I managed a nod. Nothing more. Driving away, the silence inside the car felt crushing. The air was thick, like I'd stepped out of reality and into a story where I was the only one who didn't know the ending. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Instead, I drove across town and parked outside Nora's building. She was my closest friend, and if I was being honest, my only friend left who didn't come with terms and conditions. I didn't go in. I just sat in the car, letting the weight of it all settle into my shoulders like wet cement. What would I say? That my family had changed the locks, installed a stranger, and erased me while smiling over dinner. It was after dark when Nora found me still parked, wrapped in the same silence I'd left the house with. She didn't scold. She just opened the passenger door, slid in beside me, and sat. "I need to grab a few things," I said eventually, "from what used to be my home." She nodded once. "Let's go." The drive back was quiet. The stranger was gone now, and the porch light was off. Nora stood by the walkway while I tried to peer through a crack in the blinds. Inside, the living room was lit, and someone was moving furniture. Framed photos lined the mantel, none of them mine. A porch light flicked on next door, and an older man in a windbreaker stepped out. "You Jolene?" "I am." He looked down the street, then back at me. "They've been in and out for weeks, always while you were gone. Figured it wasn't my place to say." Nora turned to me, her voice like cold steel. "You need to get a lawyer, tonight." Nora poured coffee into a chipped ceramic mug I remembered from her first apartment. She didn't say much, just set it in front of me and sat down across the table. The silence stretched between us, not awkward, not heavy, just waiting for me to fill it. I stared at the mug, tracing the little crack in the glaze with my eyes like it could somehow anchor me. "They didn't just push you out," she said finally. "They planned it." I nodded once. "The neighbors said they'd been in and out. Weeks." Nora folded her hands. "This isn't miscommunication, Jolene. This was organized." I didn't respond right away. My chest felt like someone had layered bricks over it, one cold realization at a time. They hadn't just acted on impulse. This wasn't heat-of-the-moment dysfunction. They had a blueprint, and I'd walked straight into it, casserole and all. "I want a lawyer," I said. My voice didn't waver. "Someone who deals with this kind of thing, who's seen families pretend love while plotting theft." Nora's eyes softened, just briefly. "I know someone." It wasn't until I was alone in her guest room, laying on top of the covers in jeans and a hoodie, that the memory returned. Unbidden, clear. I was 22, still in college. I'd come home for a weekend to get some paperwork notarized, and I'd passed by the den. The door was cracked. I wasn't eavesdropping, not on purpose, but I heard my name. "She'll sign," my dad had said. "Once she does, it's ours to manage." Isolde's laugh followed. "She's clueless." I'd told myself back then it was about something else. A loan? Taxes? I didn't press it because I didn't want to know. I didn't want to believe they saw me as a tool, not a daughter. But now, laying there in the dim light of Nora's guest lamp, I realized that moment wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time I accidentally saw the scaffolding. The next morning, we met Barbara Herrera at a small office downtown. Her handshake was dry, firm, her voice clipped but not unkind. She listened as Nora explained the situation, glancing at me now and then as if assessing how far I'd let things go before snapping. "You're not the first," she said simply. "People think real estate theft only happens between strangers. It doesn't. The worst of it happens between people with matching last names." I signed the initial paperwork. She outlined next steps. Document everything. Don't engage emotionally. Forward all communication. Secure your records. It felt clinical, procedural. And yet, in a strange way, it steadied me. For the first time in days, I felt like I was doing something more than surviving. Later that night, Nora sat beside me as I logged into my cloud storage. Years ago, I'd installed cameras inside the house for safety. Motion-triggered, backed up automatically. I hadn't looked at them since I moved in. But now, Marla, sorting through the drawers in my office, her face calm, methodical. Isolde, holding one of my photo frames, removing the picture, slipping in one of her and Dad. Vernon sitting at my desk, typing something, then leaning back like he was testing the chair for size. They looked comfortable, like they'd been there a while, like I'd interrupted them. "I didn't leave," I said out loud. They were already moving in. My absence just made it official. Nora didn't speak. She didn't have to. As I clicked through more footage, another tab caught my eye. My home phone account. There was a saved voicemail, dated 2 weeks before the dinner. I played it. "Once she's out," Isolde's voice came through, sharp and clean. "Don't let her back in, not even for the photo albums." I sat frozen. The voice in the recording wasn't angry or emotional. It was bored. Like she was talking about moving a box of junk no one wanted. That night, I didn't sleep. And by morning, I wasn't just angry, I was ready. By late afternoon, the tremor in my hands had given way to something steadier. Not calm, exactly, but a kind of internal click, like my soul had exhaled and turned its face toward battle. I sat at Nora's kitchen table, my laptop open, scanning through folders I hadn't touched since closing on the house. Documents, PDFs, signatures, all the small victories that made this place mine in the eyes of the law, even if my family had rewritten the story in their own heads. There it was, a scanned copy of the release of lien, dated, signed, notarized, full payment made 6 months ago. I'd printed it once and saved the hard copy in my file cabinet, but seeing it now on the screen was something else. It was like looking at a birth certificate, proof of existence. I forwarded the file to Barbara with no subject line, just an attachment. Then I added the closing statement from the mortgage company. Then the title deed, marked sole ownership. My name, and only mine, printed in black ink that suddenly felt holy. I sat back in the chair and whispered it, just to hear the words aloud. No more trying to be the good daughter. That evening, I plugged in an external hard drive and began combing through archived footage from my security system. Footage I had mostly ignored after installation. It had recorded motion-triggered clips, small slices of movement I once thought would capture porch thieves or raccoons. Instead, it had captured Marla, my mother, calmly opening the drawers in my home office. Not rifling, not snooping, just opening, closing, evaluating, like a realtor measuring storage space. Then Isolde, placing books on the living room shelves, not mine, hers. Then Vernon, standing at my desk, unplugging my router and replacing it with one of his name written in faded black Sharpie across a strip of masking tape. They weren't trespassers, they were settlers, moving in like I had evaporated. I cataloged each clip, naming them by timestamp, saving them to a folder I titled, They Took It. When I shut the laptop, my palms were damp. Not from fear, but from fury so cold it felt clinical. The next morning, over weak coffee, I turned to Nora and said it out loud. "They stole my house." She didn't flinch, just gave a slow nod and replied, "They underestimated you. That's their mistake." That moment didn't come with fireworks. It didn't need to. It was a quiet truth finally spoken aloud, and in that stillness, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't asking for validation. I wasn't waiting to be believed. I picked up my phone and opened the camera. I hit record. I looked directly at the lens, shoulders squared. "My name is Jolene Shipman," I said. "This is a record of what was taken from me, by people I share blood with. This is not for sympathy. This is for documentation." Then I saved it to the same hard drive. Later that afternoon, Barbara sent over a draft of the cease and desist letter. It was 8 pages long, filled with legal terminology that sounded like poetry to me. I printed it, sat on the floor with my back against Nora's bookshelf, and read every line out loud. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Shipman and Ms. Isolde Shipman," every sentence read like a correction to the story they had tried to publish about me. "You are hereby notified that continued occupation, manipulation, or claim to ownership of the property located at..." When I finished, I folded the letter in thirds and sealed the envelope myself. My hands shook. I didn't cry. That night, I slept without dreaming. But when I woke at dawn, the phone was already ringing. My screen lit up with Vernon's name. I let it go to voicemail. When it buzzed a minute later, I listened. "You just started something you won't be able to finish," he said. Voice low, measured. And for the first time, I smiled. Because finally, I was being heard. The voicemail sat in my inbox like a grenade with the pin half pulled. I didn't play it right away. I poured myself a mug of coffee I wouldn't drink, stood at the window of Nora's apartment, and watched traffic crawl along Mulberry Street. When I finally tapped play, Vernon's voice slithered through the speaker. "You just started something you won't be able to finish." That was it. No hello. No explanation. Just a quiet threat disguised as fatherly concern. I forwarded the recording to Barbara with a single line. "This is how they escalate," she replied minutes later. "We expected this. Now we pressure harder." I called the mortgage lender next. I wanted confirmation that everything was locked down, that no further changes could be made to the title. But the tone on the other end had changed. "I'm sorry, Ms. Shipman," the rep said. "Due to the legal involvement, we're unable to provide additional information without formal request from your attorney." The bank had gone quiet. Nora didn't sugarcoat it. "They're making noise behind the scenes, trying to contain the story, keep it in the family." I nodded. "Well, it's not in the family anymore." Barbara filed the affidavit with the county clerk by noon. I signed the form in ink that bled just a little on the page. There it was. Jolene E. Shipman, sole legal owner. I stared at the signature line for a moment after the pen left the paper. It looked like mine. It felt like mine. This wasn't permission anymore. It was a declaration. Around 3, I texted Clayton. Me. "You free for coffee?" Clayton. "Sure. Usual place?" We hadn't spoken much since we'd split last fall, but he had always been the neutral zone. Steady, even-keeled, not one to pick sides. I thought maybe hearing it out loud from someone with distance would help me make sense of the madness. He arrived first, already halfway through an Americano when I walked in. "Hey, stranger," he said, standing just enough to be polite. I sat, wrapping my hands around the ceramic cup, even though it burned. "So, my family tried to steal my house." He blinked, tilted his head like a dog hearing a high-pitched sound. "Wait, like, actually?" "Yes. Changed the locks, put a stranger in there, told the bank they were co-owners." His expression shifted from surprise to vague discomfort. "That's rough," he said, "but they're still your parents, right?" That word, still, felt like a knife. He continued, "Maybe just let them cool off? Families go through weird stuff." "They didn't lose their temper," I said quietly. "They submitted forged documents. They installed themselves like they were moving into a vacation rental. My mom repacked my dishes." Clayton shrugged. "It just sounds like a misunderstanding." I stood. "People who don't believe you when you speak softly," I said, "don't deserve to hear you roar." His mouth opened, but I was already walking away. Back at Nora's, I sat on the floor, papers and post-it notes spread out like a crime board. She joined me, still in her court shoes, unbothered by the clutter. "Restraining order?" she asked. "Maybe. At least a lien protection filing. I want layers. I want their legal feet tangled every time they try to move." She nodded. "Good. They're counting on you to stay emotional. This isn't personal to them, it's transactional." Her words stuck, not because they were new, but because I finally believed them. I pulled up the voicemail again, the one where Isolde had said, "Don't let her back in, not even for the photo albums." She wasn't angry in that recording. She was bored, efficient. And now I understood why. That night, I tried logging into the smart system for the house. My credentials were denied. Password changed, settings wiped. It was no longer Jolene's house. It was renamed Tate Family Home. I drove by just after sunset. The porch light was a different hue, my soft amber replaced by harsh blue-white. Through the front window, I could see new portraits lining the wall. Family photos, not mine. There were pictures of Vernon and Marla, beaming in outdated poses. One of Isolde and her dog. A sepia-toned wedding photo of my parents. My face? Absent. Erased. And that was when I realized They weren't just evicting me from the house. They were rewriting the story entirely. By mid-morning, the cold was already biting. Not sharp like winter's peak, but the kind that lingers around your wrists no matter how deep you bury them in your coat. I parked across the street from what used to be my home. Not a home now, just a structure. A space I'd built with purpose and pride, stripped and hollowed by people who called themselves family. In one hand, I held a manila envelope. Inside it was the cease and desist letter Barbara had finalized, along with supporting ownership documents. Everything printed, signed, time-stamped, cleaner than anything they'd ever tried to sneak past a notary. I didn't walk up to the door. I passed the papers to the sheriff's deputy, who nodded curtly before heading up the path. I stayed on the sidewalk, the smell of pine mulch from the neighbor's yard mixing with the bitterness of exhaust from passing cars. As the deputy knocked, I looked through the front window. They'd taken it further. My photos were gone. The one of me standing with my degree beside my car, the car I paid for myself. Gone. The art I'd hung over the fireplace replaced with some generic mass-printed barn scene. Storage bins that once held my camping gear now had taped labels in unfamiliar handwriting. Their handwriting. They hadn't just moved me out. They were deleting me. I turned to leave but caught something in the alley behind the fence. A corner of a bookshelf, mine, propped awkwardly next to two garbage bags. I stepped closer, the cold sharper in the shadowed space between garages. The shelf had a long split down the back, like it had been dropped hard. One of the bags was loosely tied, and when the wind shifted, I caught a scent I hadn't smelled in years. Lavender and rosewater, my grandmother's sachets. She used to tuck them between towels, and I had inherited the last few after her funeral. They threw it away. I snapped a photo on my phone, backed up, and sent it straight to Barbara. Subject line, evidence of erasure. By early afternoon, Nora and I were back at her apartment. Papers spread across the floor like a quilt of consequence. Barbara joined us via speakerphone. I laid out the title deed again, the payoff statement, the clean chain of ownership. This, I said, tapping the closing date, is when it became mine. No cosigners, no shared debt, no transfer agreements. Barbara's voice came through crisp. Good. We'll present this with the footage. I nodded, voice calm. I don't need to scream. The paperwork speaks louder. That evening, we stood across the street again. This time, the sheriff's office delivered the formal orders, legally binding notice to vacate or cease further claim. Two officers knocked. One waited by the gate. Vernon answered, stone-faced. Marla stood just behind him, arms folded like she was bracing for a storm. This house was always meant for the family, Vernon told the officers. She's emotionally unstable. Ask anyone. She's never been grounded. They didn't argue with the law. They just performed for it. I stayed hidden behind the passenger seat window. I recorded the interaction, their tone, their language, their gall. Not because I needed more proof, but because watching it unfold in real time made something inside me anchor. The more they spoke, the more they exposed themselves. That night, after Nora and I debriefed, after Barbara logged the day's updates, after I finally sank into the couch and stared at the ceiling in silence, my phone buzzed again. No caller ID. I stared at it until the voicemail icon appeared. I pressed play. You think you've won something? The voice was low, unfamiliar, male, but I knew whose circle it came from. You haven't seen what we're capable of. No name, no threat spelled out, just venom behind breath. I set the phone down, picked it back up, and forwarded it to Barbara. The next morning, Nora woke me with a text. Nora, check your credit report, now. The notification came before sunrise. Nora's text lit up my screen with only 5 words. Check your credit report. Now. Still in pajamas, I sat at her kitchen table and opened the browser on her laptop. It took me 2 logins to remember the password. Then the page loaded, and I felt it. My stomach turning cold before my eyes even finished scanning. 2 new inquiries. One from a department store I hadn't stepped into in a decade, another from a credit card company I'd never applied to. Both applications had been submitted from an IP address linked to my parents' home. The name was mine. The address wasn't. I stared at the screen for a full minute before I spoke. "They're using my name," I said. "They're not done with the house. They're going after my entire life." Nora leaned in, reading over my shoulder. "This isn't emotional anymore. This is financial fraud." I nodded, quietly seething. "It's a trap, and they started laying it years ago." Later that morning, I dug through old emails, the ones I had archived but never deleted. There it was, an exchange with Marla dated 2 years back. She had asked for my social security number for the accountant. Another thread where Vernon requested a copy of my W-2, so he could check something for me before I filed. I had sent it all, because back then, I still wanted to believe that being agreeable would earn me trust. Nora and I met Barbara downtown just before noon. Her office felt warmer than usual, less sterile, more focused. The three of us sat down, and I slid the laptop across the table. "They've crossed into identity theft," I said. "What do we do next?" Barbara didn't blink. "We file! Fast!" She began drafting the emergency petition for a restraining order, citing not just the house, but now the attempted financial manipulation. I handed over every document, every email, every click of stupidity I'd once mistaken for family loyalty. "You're not a victim anymore," Nora said softly. "You're a litigant." The words didn't comfort me, but they clarified me. That evening, I stepped out onto the balcony, phone in hand, waiting for air to move through me. Instead, the screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Aunt Vera. I hesitated, then answered. "Jolene," she said, her voice already tense. "Can we just talk like adults?" "I'm listening." "There's a lot of upset happening right now. You airing family business to lawyers. It's not how we solve things." "I tried solving things at a dinner table. You remember how that ended?" She sighed. "Look, I'm not defending what they did, but you need to understand how this looks. You, filing lawsuits, police reports, you're making yourself look ungrateful." My breath caught. Then I exhaled through my teeth. "Gratitude doesn't include silence when someone steals from you." She said my name again, softer this time, like she could undo it all with tone. "I'm done, Vera," I said. "I'm not your project. I'm not their puppet. I'm the only person in this family who's done everything without stealing it first." Then I hung up, and for the first time after a family call, I didn't cry. After dinner, Nora and I sorted through folders on her desktop when an email pinged into my inbox. The subject line read, "Evidence, play in private." There was no message, just a single audio file. I looked at Nora, my pulse beginning to climb. "Someone sent me a recording." She leaned forward. "Play it." My finger hovered over the screen. Then I hit play. At first, all I heard was the background hum of a car. Then Vernon's voice, calm as ever, filtered through the speakers. "We start with the key," he said, like he was discussing what to pick up from the hardware store. "Once she's out, change the locks and slowly shift everything. She'll push back, but it won't hold in court if it looks like a family matter." Isolde laughed. "She'll cry first, then she'll call a lawyer." "By then," he replied, "the narrative's ours." I didn't move. Nora was frozen across the table, eyes wide, mouth parted just slightly. The audio played on for another minute. Details about when to switch out the Wi-Fi, who should handle utilities, even how to reassign my personal possessions. None of it was emotional. None of it sounded like a father and daughter. It was a strategy session. When the recording ended, I saved it in 3 separate locations. We sent it to Barbara immediately. Less than an hour later, we were sitting in a conference room at the courthouse, everything printed, labeled, organized. Barbara handed the judge's clerk a thumb drive and a signed emergency motion. The judge reviewed it within 2 hours. An official review hearing was scheduled for the following week. When we walked out of that building, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, but sharper. Like a glass that had cracked all the way down but hadn't shattered yet. That night, back at Nora's, I opened my laptop and signed into a private support forum. I'd been a silent member for months, a voyeur of other women's unravelings. Financial abuse, emotional coercion, estate manipulation. I posted a redacted version of my story. Just the facts, no names, no sentiment. By morning, it had over 300 comments. I thought I was crazy. This happened to my sister. My parents did the same thing, only I didn't catch it in time. I didn't respond to all of them. I didn't need to. Just knowing I wasn't the first, or the only, was enough to pull some oxygen back into my chest. Later that afternoon, a reporter from Denver messaged me privately. "Hi Jolene, I saw your post in the forum. We're doing a series on financial fraud inside families. Would you be willing to speak, even off the record?" I didn't reply, but I didn't delete the message either. At some point between lunch and sunset, the ripple reached them. Vernon got a call from an old business partner. Barbara told me he looked like he'd been blindsided. The man asked, "Is that your daughter in the post about real estate fraud?" He didn't answer. Just ended the call. Marla texted me later. One word. Why? I stared at the screen, then locked it without typing back. Isolde, I learned, had been removed from the speaker list of a women's leadership conference she'd been bragging about for months. The email had circulated. Someone forwarded it to me anonymously. Apparently, being associated with a legal case involving family property theft didn't sit well with their board. That night, I sat on the windowsill of Nora's apartment and opened the courthouse portal. My case was officially updated. My name, my documents, my scheduled hearing date. I read it 3 times, let it settle in my bones, then closed the laptop. "This is mine," I said aloud. Not the case. The story. The courthouse looked different that morning. Same stone walls, same columns, same sterile benches inside. But I wasn't the same woman walking through its doors. Barbara met me at the front steps with 2 manila folders tucked under her arm, crisp blazer pressed so sharp it could slice air. Nora followed behind her, clutching a slim notepad, even though she wouldn't speak. She was there for presence, for balance, for the memory of every time they told me I imagined it. We passed through security and waited outside the courtroom. I pressed my palms against each other to ground myself. No trembling today. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. "Let them say it," Nora whispered. "Let them say it with their own mouths." Inside, the room was colder than I remembered from my clerkship days. Vernon sat at the defense table with a different suit than I expected. Less polished, more performative. Marla was beside him, her eyes flicking from the judge to the floor. Isolde sat on the other side, legs crossed, jaw tight. The bailiff called the case. Barbara opened. She didn't waste time, just presented the timeline, the documents, the audio recording of Vernon and Isolde coordinating the takeover. Then the judge asked Vernon to speak. He stood like he belonged there, like this was just another boardroom. "We supported our daughter for years," he began. "This is a misunderstanding. We were trying to protect family assets." Barbara interrupted him, politely but firmly. "Mr. Shipman, do you deny submitting false ownership claims to Midwestern Bank?" "I deny any criminal intent," he shot back. If she had just listened, none of this would have happened. His voice cracked slightly on that last part, just enough for the judge to glance over the top of her glasses. Then came Isolde's turn. She adjusted her scarf like it mattered, then said, "I was only helping my parents organize the property. The place was always meant for the family. Jolene doesn't even like entertaining. It's not like she used that office anyway." Barbara raised a single printout, a photo of Isolde removing folders labeled with my name, placing them in a box with her initials scrawled on the side. The judge leaned forward. "You believed the space was yours?" Isolde's eyes faltered. It felt like shared responsibility." "You're not on the deed," the judge said. Are you? Isolde didn't answer. Finally, it was my turn. I walked slowly to the stand, took the oath, sat down, and then I spoke. Not as the woman who got locked out of her home, but as the one who built it. I bought that house alone. I paid every mortgage installment myself. My father and sister entered my home without permission. My mother packed up my belongings while I was at work, and when I questioned it, they called me unstable. I paused, let the silence do its work. They didn't just try to take a house, they tried to erase the woman who built it. No dramatics, no tears. Just truth. The judge took a beat before speaking. This court finds sufficient evidence that Ms. Shipman is the sole legal owner of the property. The court also finds grounds to uphold the temporary restraining order and opens inquiry into possible financial misconduct. Vernon inhaled sharply. Marla didn't look at me. Isolde clenched her fists under the table. I didn't react, not in that room. Outside, under the bright midday sky, a reporter caught me just before I reached the car. Ms. Shipman, do you consider this justice? I looked into the lens and answered without hesitation. Justice is knowing I never have to explain myself to them again. But the house wasn't whole yet. It still carried their fingerprints. The key turned with more resistance than I remembered. It was like the house itself wasn't sure if it should let me back in. But when the lock finally clicked, I stepped into silence. It didn't smell like home anymore. The faint trace of eucalyptus I used to love had been replaced by something synthetic. Lavender plug-ins, the kind Marla liked. The curtains were different, stiffer. A dusty blue instead of the cream ones I'd hemmed myself. Even the floor seemed quieter, like it had grown used to the new footsteps. I dropped my bag by the door and stood still for a long time. Then, one drawer at a time, I started undoing them. The bookshelf in the living room held magazines I didn't read. A vase I'd never bought sat in place of my favorite ceramic pitcher. I gathered it all, placing each piece in a box I labeled theirs, not out of spite, out of clarity. Every drawer I opened reminded me they'd been here, that they'd moved through this space with no regard. But now they were not, and I was. In the kitchen, tucked behind the silverware tray, I found it. A cream envelope, my name in Marla's handwriting. Inside was a single-page note. You'll understand someday. That was the first line. Family decisions are complex. You were always headstrong, but we meant well. This was about preserving what matters. You'll see that one day. No apology, no remorse. I stepped out back, grabbed the metal fire pit cover, and lit the corner of the page with a match. The flame curled through her words like they'd been waiting for it. Ash floated up and away into the late afternoon sky. I watched until nothing remained but the small metal grate, warm with silence. I understand perfectly, I said to no one. That weekend, I knocked on the neighbor's door, the same one who'd once pulled Nora aside. Mrs. Kavanaugh answered in her usual cardigan and wool slippers, surprised but not unkind. I brought cookies, I said, holding out a foil-covered tray. And maybe just wanted to say thank you. She invited me in without hesitation. Her home smelled like cinnamon and old carpet. We sat at her kitchen table for almost an hour, sipping weak tea. She told me they'd always suspected something was off, that Marla and Vernon had acted entitled, like the property had already been theirs. We didn't want to get in the middle, she said gently, but I'm glad you stood up. I walked back across the lawn with a strange new feeling growing in my chest, something like belonging, not to a family, but to a neighborhood, a place. On Monday morning, Barbara called. The state's financial crimes unit is moving forward. They've seen the forged applications. If it connects directly to your father, there could be formal charges. I nodded, pacing my living room with bare feet. I'm not after revenge, I told her. I just want it recorded. I want the truth to have a timestamp. That week, I decorated the house for Thanksgiving. I started simple, garlands on the banister, a new wreath on the front door. Then photos, not of blood relatives, but of Nora, of Mrs. Kavanaugh, Even a snapshot from that afternoon with Barbara, smiling in the courthouse parking lot, triumphant in quiet ways. Each frame was a quiet correction. The house began to warm again, not from heat, but presence. Then, just before dusk on Wednesday, I found something on the porch. A manila envelope, no return address. Inside was a photo. My childhood bedroom, as it looked when I was 10. But this time, a red X was marked in thick ink across the bed. I stood there for a moment, thumb grazing the corner of the photo. It didn't frighten me. I was exhausted. But this time, I wouldn't be running. The envelope was still sitting on the console table when I woke up. I hadn't touched it since placing it there the day before. Just the idea of it, my old bedroom marked with a red X, had said more than any threat ever could. I brought it with me when I walked down to the station, filed the photo, explained what it showed, what it meant. The officer nodded, typed, logged it. But without a clear sender, no direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. "It could just be symbolic," he said gently. "I know," I replied. "That's why it's worse." Later that week, while I was stringing white lights across the porch railing, Isolde showed up. No warning, no text. Just her car pulling up, engine still warm when she stepped out. She didn't bring anything, not a gift, not a peace offering. She just stood there, holding her purse like it might hold the version of herself she wanted me to see. "I was nearby," she said. I didn't answer. Thought maybe we could talk. I held her gaze for a moment, then stepped aside just enough to let her pass. She walked in slowly, scanning the walls. Her eyes paused where new photos now hung, me and Nora at the courthouse, a Polaroid of me with Mrs. Kavanaugh from Thanksgiving. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded. "It's quiet in here." "Most peace is." She hesitated. "I'm not proud of how things happened. None of us expected it to get legal." I sat across from her. "You're not here for me. You're here to control the story, to soften it before it spreads further." Her mouth twitched. "You think that's all I care about?" "No," I said. "I think you care very much about being perceived as the better daughter." She exhaled. "Maybe I was jealous. Maybe I didn't think you deserved the house." "There it is," I said quietly. She looked away. "That doesn't mean I wanted it to go this far." "But it did, and you let it." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I leaned forward. "You don't get to rewrite your role just because I survived it." That night, a Christmas card slid through my mailbox. Cream-colored envelope. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Marla's. Inside was a generic winter scene, and below it, in neat cursive, "Wishing you clarity and peace." From Mom. Tucked inside was a printed quote, "Forgiveness is the scent the violet sheds on the heel that crushed it." "No, I'm sorry. No ownership." I didn't respond, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but because forgiveness doesn't always require reconnection. A few days later, Nora and I strolled through the holiday market near downtown. String lights glowed against the snow-dusted roofs, and the air smelled of pine and cinnamon and roasted nuts. We paused by a booth selling handmade mugs. "You never spoke publicly," she said, gently lifting one with a crooked handle. "I didn't need to." She nodded. "Sometimes survival is the louder message than retaliation." I smiled. The silence I chose wasn't weakness. It was clarity. Back home, I installed a new security system. One I chose, configured, tested. Then I replaced the old curtains, the ones they'd hung in their attempt to rebrand my life. I added stained glass to the windows they used to look through. And then I rolled up the rug in the living room, the last thing they'd left behind. Underneath, my hardwood floor was scratched, imperfect, but strong. Mine. I stood there in the quiet, barefoot on that old floor, and felt something shift. Not closure. Not a neat ribbon tied around the mess. But peace. On Christmas morning, the sky outside was soft gray, snow layering the sidewalk like powdered sugar. My phone buzzed. Nora. Brunch at my place. Chosen family only. I didn't bring a gift. I brought peace. And this time, it was enough. Nora opened the door with her usual sideways smile and a mock scowl at the snow collecting on her front step. I handed her a small bouquet of winter greenery and pine cones, bundled with a ribbon I found in my kitchen drawer. "No gift?" she teased. "I brought peace," I said, "and I don't wrap that anymore." Inside, her place was loud in all the right ways. Laughter from her sister-in-law in the kitchen, jazz playing low in the background, a toddler dragging a stuffed bear across the floor with dramatic flair. The air smelled like cinnamon rolls and brewed coffee, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was preparing myself for something to go wrong. These aren't people I share blood with, I thought, as I sipped cider in the corner, watching Nora orchestrate brunch like a general with a gentle baton. But they're mine. When I returned home that afternoon, the stillness didn't bother me. I lit a candle near the front window and sat on the floor with a notebook in my lap. The light filtered through the stained glass I'd installed, amber, teal, and a single triangle of red. Every color warmed the hardwood like a quilt. I walked from room to room, not to inspect, not to clean, just to be in them. The office where I used to write late into the night was now both workspace and sanctuary. The living room no longer felt like someone else had moved the furniture just slightly wrong. The kitchen? Mine again. Every drawer labeled the way I preferred it, with no one rearranging spices or suggesting I didn't really need a second colander. The house didn't change. I did. And that was enough. 3 days later, I checked my mailbox and found a card from an old college professor, someone I hadn't heard from in years. Inside was a handwritten note and a quote tucked neatly into the corner. "Freedom is not the absence of memories. It's knowing they don't own you anymore." I pinned it to my new corkboard, next to affirmations written by women in the support group. Phrases like, "You're allowed to close doors," and "Some survival looks like silence." That same afternoon, I received one last letter from Vernon. His handwriting was as rigid as I remembered. The lines were clean, only a few sentences. I shouldn't have let things get that far. I was trying to protect what I built. I didn't realize how much of it was yours. There was no "I'm sorry," no acknowledgement of what he had done, just enough words to sound like regret. I read it once, then filed it away in the back of a drawer. Not all doors have to be closed, but some don't need to be reopened. On New Year's Eve, I sat on my porch with a mug of black coffee, bundled in a blanket Nora had knitted the year she quit her firm. Fireworks cracked softly over the neighborhood, faint behind the trees. "They tried to take my house," I whispered, "and nearly succeeded. But they couldn't take the woman who built it." I watched as the lights faded and the sky settled. Then I stood, walked inside, and locked my door. Not in fear, in peace. This home doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be mine. And now, it is. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that boundaries don't make you selfish. They make you free. Sometimes the people we love the most are the very ones who teach us how important it is to say no. I used to believe that family meant forever, no matter what. But now I know, forever only works when there's respect on both sides. Taking back my home wasn't just about brick and wood. It was about reclaiming my voice, my value, and the quiet strength I didn't know I had. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to win every argument to reclaim your worth. Sometimes, just standing your ground is the loudest truth there is. And maybe you've been through something similar, being dismissed, overwritten, or treated like you didn't belong in your own story. If you have, I hope this reminds you that it's never too late to draw the line and rebuild. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this video touched something in you, drop a 1 in the comments or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't, tell me why. Your honesty matters here. If you enjoyed this story and want more true, heartfelt journeys like it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us for the next chapter. Because sometimes the stories we need most are the ones that remind us we're not alone.